So, this is the adult timeline portion of the timeline. Ocarina of Time is followed by the Wind Waker, which is followed by Phantom Hourglass and Spirit Tracks. So, what's interesting about this portion in specific, when we talk about the common elements, again, there's no Ganon in these games, in Phantom Hourglass and Spirit Tracks, at least in that era. No Master Sword. The Master Sword is actually drowned in the old Hyrule. He's impaled in Ganon, so they're both flooded inside. And there's, again, after the Wind Waker, there's no mention of the Triforce. No Triforce. And so, no Ganon, no Master Sword, no Triforce. Logically, what does this remind you of? It does remind you of the Four Sword games, right or not? It does. Because there is, in the Four Sword games, basically there's no Ganon until the end, there's no Master Sword, there's the Four Sword, and there's no Triforce, basically. And another thing that reminds you of the Four Sword games is, instead of the Triforce, there's talk about something called the Life Force, which is basically what is a force that's in each individual, per se. First hinted at in Phantom Hourglass, in a very interesting and another important event of Phantom Hourglass is the intro of Phantom Hourglass. Phantom Hourglass intro features Zelda or Tetra, as explained later in the game, turning into stone when invading a certain ghost ship. And they explain it in the sense that the Sand of Hours, or each individual has a certain life force per se, and the monsters were attracted to Zelda because of her life force. So what they did is seep the life force out of her and turn her into stone. What does that remind you of? It reminds you of the introduction. It's exactly the same introduction as the Minish Cap. The Minish Cap features Zelda having something called the Light Force, in which Vati saps her out of, and she turns into stone. I don't think it's a coincidence that Nintendo, maybe they did want to feature like an homage to it, but it does, in the same time, there is significance, because I think that the Life Force and the Light Force are one and the same, maybe technical different terms, or maybe there's a mistranslation, but they are the same element. It's the Life Force and the Light Force. It's really important because there's no Triforce in this era, and there's no Triforce in the Four Sword era. So yeah, what I'm getting to, basically, without delaying further, is the Four Sword series. They do belong in the era of the Wind Waker, but how did they place? That's a very interesting question. It does, it's really hard to place also the Four Sword games here, because Phantom Hourglass has them searching for a new Hyrule, and Spirit Tracks has Link and a different generation of era of Link and Zelda finding that new Hyrule and staying there, which has a different history. It has a new history with a new enemy, and it's a different origin. This new Hyrule, which is doesn't fit the Four Sword games. It's hard to place it there, unless you're placing it after Spirit Tracks. Eras after Spirit Tracks. So yeah, so there are certain solutions that I like to put upon you guys. Let's go again. So this is the adult timeline, and we have Ocarina of Time, and the flood happens, right? One of the major events in the intro of the Wind Waker. The Wind Waker happens. Phantom Hourglass happens, and then followed by an era of New Hyrule. They call it the Spirit Tracks. So as I said before, one solution here is to feature the Four Swords games after Spirit Tracks, eras or years later, but at the same time it doesn't make sense, because Spirit Tracks New Hyrule has a different history, and there's a different sword, the Phantom Sword or the Spirit Blade, it's really different from. But Spirit Tracks does show hint of reincarnation also when they talking about the goddesses or the good side. What are they called? I forgot their names. The good people, those old people that help Link in Spirit Tracks. They're actually reincarnation of the the goddesses, and it does talk a lot about reincarnation. That's another word that features in the Four Sword games. As I was saying, yeah, it doesn't make sense to feature it in this Hyrule, this era. But I'm presenting a what if scenario here. What if the flood happens and we don't necessarily know whether there are there's one Hyrule or another Hyrule. So yeah, my solution is actually simple. The Minish Cap or the Four Sword games are featured in another Hyrule, a different Hyrule from the Wind Waker, Phantom Hourglass, and Spirit Tracks. And at the same time, it's attached to this universe. So that basically is, I think to me, is the optimal solution for the Four Sword games, because they do have a lot of common elements with this era. Like I said, there's no Ganon, there's no Triforce, the Light Force, and all this parallelisms between both games. So it does make sense putting it in a different Hyrule, because it's a different history. It has a different sword, the Four Sword, and there's different antagonists, Vati, and at the same time it does fit a lot, because when you talk about the Minish Cap's intro, and it is an origin story. So basically it's an origin story for a different Hyrule, and how the Minish are actually responsible for the rupees, and it's a different origin story. It's an alternate origin story taking place in a different Hyrule in the same era, and it does makes a lot of sense. Like I said, there are attachments between these two lines here. They're just different Hyrules, but common elements. One thing is the Four Sword Adventures obviously has to take place. Even though they're taking place in parallel times, or they're taking place, they could be taking place simultaneously. The Wind Waker, Phantom Hourglass, and the Minish Cap and Four Swords. The Four Swords Adventures has to take place. One exception: it has to take place years later, after, or an era different from the Wind Waker's era, because it does feature Ganon's revival, in which Ganon from here uses Vati in the Four Swords Adventures. So it is. Yeah, I know it's sort of fan fictiony, but at the same time, the flood, it does that event it's really vague. It doesn't show. It does show. We could interpret. We could talk about a new Hyrule, and the one different from the one that's featured in the Wind Waker. So yeah, that's my solution basically, and I do hope you guys enjoyed it. I know it is insignificant with the new timeline that's presented by Nintendo, but nonetheless, I just like to throw it out there. So yeah, that's basically it with this really long lecture. 38 minutes? Yeah, that was long. I rambled a lot here, but I hope you guys, had enjoyed it, and you guys were able to follow up with me, even though I did ramble on here and there. I'm gonna try dividing this lecture so it'll be easier for everybody to watch. So I'll catch everybody later, and I hope you enjoy.